Okay, so if you're joining us now, you are now on part number 2 of the podcast session with Tab Sims. What a great first session that we had as we talked about stewardship. Today we're going to key in on tithing, and I think that you're going to be really blessed by this. This is going to be kind of a controversial subject. This makes some people feel kind of uneasy, but nonetheless, what we talk about today is biblical, comes straight out of Scripture. And so if you'll join me and my friend Tab as we go into talking today in the Upper Room podcast about tithing. So I got a couple questions on tithing.
Okay.
And we're gonna kind of, tithing is a form of stewardship, but tithing is also, it's a biblical command.
It's
right?
a command.
So it's kind of jumping out of stewardship a little bit, because stewardship kind of leaves you open to how you manage. Like that's up for interpretation of, okay, this is, stewardship says I have this truck. How can I use my truck to steward the gospel? I'm going to use my truck to drive around today and find people. So that's, stewardship is managing. Tithing is a command. So that's very plain and dry. It's black and white. There's nothing that should be confusing about it. So I have a couple of things that I have opinions on, but I'd like to get yours on, of things that I feel like a lot of times people get confused with tithing. My first one is this. I hear a lot of people will say, I tithe my time. What are your thoughts on, are you able to tithe your time?
Well, you don't actually have any of your own time. It all belongs to God in the first place. I've never read anything in the Bible that speaks about tithing your time. What I read is Jesus says, as you go about your daily business, share the gospel with everybody. So we're all priests and kings in God's economy, and we should always, our time should always be subconsciously looking for a way to introduce him into a conversation or influencing for him. So I think, and boy, I don't want to offend anybody, but
That's why I asked you.
Yeah, if you have been told that or sold that, to me that sounds almost like a lie of Satan, where he is trying to deceive you into thinking, well, if I give 4 hours a day or 4 hours a week to the church times X number of dollars per hour, then I don't have to give that much in cash. And that's simply not scriptural.
The way that I look at it is a tithe means a tenth. Like by definition,
That's a
it means a
definition.
tenth. So we have 24 hours a day. So the way that I look at that is, can I tithe my time? If that were the route that we were taking, then to me that shows me that I need to tithe 2.4 hours a day to the Lord. And that's pretty hard to do, if I'm being honest. To me, it's easier to tithe 10% of my paycheck and return that back to the Lord than it is to tithe 2.4 hours a day.
Right.
That's hard to do.
Right.
So that's kind of where I've always landed on that. But that's a hard one, because people they're broke. They feel like they have no money. They don't have money. And so that's a natural reaction of where people go. They go, well, I'll tithe my time. And that's just being a good steward of your time. It's the way that I feel about that. I think people forget the blessings that come with giving a little when they have very little. The widow who gave the yeah. I mean, think about that. I mean, 10% is 10%. Toby and I talked about this yesterday. Whether you have $100 and you tithe 10, or you have $1 million and you tithe $100,000. That'd
be fun.
That's 10, right? But that's
so
still
fun.
10%, no matter what. 10%, and this is why God does it, is 10% is hard to let. It's on that verge where you can do it, but you just don't want to, because it's like, man, that's so much. And here's another thought on that 10%. Can I tithe? Why can't I just tithe 5%? Why can't I tithe 2%? Well, can I work my way up? Can I ramp my way up to 10%?
Sure. By definition, a tithe is 1/10. I mean, that's just like the definition of sin is missing the mark. The tithe is 10%. So you can give 5% of your income, or you can give any percent that you want. If it's not 10%, it's not truly a tithe.
Yeah, it's a donation.
It's a donation. It's a tip. You're tipping God like you tip the server at JR's, and God is worthy of more than our tip.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand financial struggle. I do. There was a time, very vivid in my memory, and where I was working in the corporate world. We got paid every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so every 2 weeks, Janet would make up a list of all that we owed that was due, and I knew how much our check was. Every single time we sat down and went over that, what we owed was more than my paycheck was going to be.
Couldn't do it.
Every single time. And so we'd go through the bills, and she said, well, do I pay? And I'm like, yeah, that one's past due, so yeah, we put it off from last month. You got to pay it. Okay, don't pay that one. Well, what about the tithe? I'm like, we're going to tithe one more time.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead and write it out. And Josh, we had that discussion for probably 10 years. That it was just, and
one more time.
I remember, just doing everything I could think of to make money. I was working in Dallas, and I'd cut firewood in the winter and haul it down, and after work I'd change out of a suit and tie and put on jeans and go deliver firewood and make $50 because, hey, $50 was a payment on Aaron's braces.
Yeah.
Or I would haul a load of scrap metal to Graham and get $50 or $60, and I remember one time calling Janet and asking her, how much longer is Sierra going to be in diapers? I mean, these Pampers are like, we're spending the So yeah, it was tough, and it went on every 2 weeks. We had the same conversation. It's like we're gonna be faithful to tithe one more time. And I read the book of Job so many times, and I read the book of Proverbs so many times. But in Malachi chapter 3, I think it's like verse 10, God says, "Bring you tithe in the storehouse and prove me." Mm-hmm. He's like, I double dog dare you. Mm-hmm. And it's the only place in the Bible where I see that we're invited to test God. Mm-hmm. He said, bring your tithes into the storehouse, and I will open the windows of heaven and pour out such blessings upon you that you can't hold all of them. And it doesn't, I think people tithe for like 2 weeks or a month, and they're like, well, we were expecting like the lottery, we gave money and we haven't got anything back. But we went on for like 10 years. But we equate blessings, we give money, so we equate that God's going to give us money back. Mm. But if you made out a list of the most important things in life, money would not be the number one. No way. I mean, you'd have your relationship with God, you'd have your relationship with your spouse, your kids, health. Your family, you'd have your health, all those come before money. So God can bless us with non-financial things. Yeah. But, and we drove beater cars. I mean, you talk about humbling. I was working in the concrete business, and it was so hot. And one morning I was driving to a job site from Garland over to Irving, and I was listening to WBAP, and they do the traffic. Mm-hmm. And there was like, well, that we have a broke down in the left-hand lane between Marsh and Webb's Chapel on I-635, and I'm just like, wait a minute, that's me.
You're the one.
That's me. That's me. I'm broke down. I'm here in the left-hand lane in this old beater pickup. And we were faithful. Yeah. We were faithful to tithe, but my wife and I don't drive beater pickups and cars anymore. Mm-hmm. And we were faithful. We've always been faithful. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the stock market's up or down, or cattle prices are up or down or sideways, or if whatever goes on. I have the confidence that when you obey God, mm-hmm. you can leave the consequences to Him.
Yep. Takes the pressure off your shoulders.
It does. And you, it's just easier to be obedient because you put the burden of proof back on Him. Yeah. And He's capable. We talked about in prayer Monday night how faithful God was. Yeah. I mean, He is so faithful. I mean, there's so many descriptors you can use for God, but He is just so faithful. The three things that God appreciates, which ties into tithing and stewardship, is sacrifice, obedience, and faith. Yep. And that's all exhibited when we are faithful with our money, our possessions, and our resources. Is we please God. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Hebrews 11:6. So, mm-hmm. God led Abram then on a 900-mile trek down to the Promised Land, mm-hmm. and he never knew. Yep. Beyond just go today where he was going to be. So that's faith that pleases God.
Yep. That's good.
So if you can give 2%, you can give 5%. That's great, but you're still being disobedient. And partial obedience is disobedience. And if you're disobeying God, who are you obeying?
And God's hand isn't going to be over disobedience either.
No, he can't bless. That can be a blessing blocker.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, that's good. I was thinking about when you're talking about Malachi, talking about like testing God, and with my kids, there's a lot of times where I'll, they'll say something and I'll be like, oh yeah, bet me, or like I'm mouthing off to a 7-year-old or whatever, and what I'm doing is I'm saying I'm so confident in what I know that I'm not going to be a liar to my kids. So I'll be like, okay, well then try me out. See if I'm wrong on this. Go ask your mom. And that to me reminds me of God. Is he's just going, not that he changes on anything, but he's just saying like, listen, man, on your first fruits, bring them in, and try me on this. And I promise you, like, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Yeah.
This is never going to change. So try me.
Yeah.
And so talking about first fruits, why the first fruits?
Well, if you tithe off, and let's go back to the society as it was then. It was an agrarian society. They raised wheat and barley and sheep and goats and that sort of thing. So when it came time to gather in the crops, if you waited until your crops were all gathered in and you paid the bank that you borrowed to buy the seed and you saw that you were going to make a profit, it doesn't require any faith to tithe off of that. So what God is saying is tithe off your first fruits, because that requires faith, because you don't know what a hailstorm is going to come through and beat your wheat crop into the ground. So it requires faith to give. It requires faith to put that tithe check in the box before you pay your bills. Those are all examples of faith, and what you're doing is you're just trusting God. You're just trusting God. And if you can't trust God with your money, and your car and your house, how are you going to trust him with salvation?
No kidding.
I mean, if you can't trust him with these minor things, how can you trust him with the most important thing that exists, and that's your eternal salvation?
Man,
so if you can trust him for that, you can trust him for this stuff over here. Now, this comes with a warning label. It ain't going to be easy. I went through Janet and I went through 10 years of struggle. And Satan's ears will perk up when you say, by golly, we're going to tithe in this household. You're going to be tested. You're going to be tested.
I always tell everybody that,
But after the test comes the reward. So set your mind on things above, not on things of this earth.
I watched a video yesterday from another podcast by Jocko, and he was talking about, he used cake, for example, but I'll use Bluebell since I know that you love Bluebell.
Dutch chocolate.
It's good. Doesn't matter what kind for me, Bluebell, just whatever it is. But Tab, if I had a half gallon of Bluebell and it was full, completely full, and I'm just referencing the analogy that he used. He definitely wasn't talking about tithing, but it relates to it for sure. If I had a full bowl of Bluebell and you came in and you're like, hey, can I have a bite of that? And and I'd be like, well, of course you can. I have a whole bowl right here. But if it was down to the very bottom of the bucket and there's one bite left and you go, hey, can I have a bite? It's still the same amount of ice cream. But if it's the last bite, I'm like, man, I was saving that bite, or I'm going to go ahead and take that last bite. That's my bite. And it's, to me, it relates. Toby and I were talking about this, how that last bite, how much harder it is to give that last bite over to somebody else, even though it's the same amount of food.
Matter of perspective.
And so I think it's God. You're exactly right with what you said on the first fruits. Like, from an agricultural perspective, yes, absolutely. But even God knows our hearts, and he knows that, not that God's trying to make it easier, but I'm a lot more likely when I have a full paycheck in regards to tithe to turn over that 10% then when I get to the end of that paycheck and we start looking at the bills and I go, okay, well, it's either the electricity bill or my tithe this month. I guess go ahead and pay the electrical bill. You know, like, it puts us in a bad position, like, that God doesn't want to put us in. So God gives us the opportunity. He tells us this in Proverbs, hey, give me the first fruits. And so whenever we're faithful to do that right off the bat, we're not worried about how we're going to pay our tithe at the command that God's given to us. It's already paid.
Yeah.
And then we're trusting the provider, because we don't provide anything.
Right.
God provides. When we get down to the bottom of it, it gives God a chance to show his faithfulness every time.
You know, two things: multiplication. Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes. He can multiply your $20. And 40 years in the wilderness, and the Israelites' shoes didn't wear out, their clothes didn't wear out. He can take your resources and he can stretch them. Yeah. You have a set of tires that are good for 60,000 miles, but yet they run 110,000. They still got tread on them.
Yeah.
That's just Jesus doing his stretching. So he can do more with that 90% than you can do with the 100% all day long. Yeah. All guaranteed. Day long. Yeah. Yeah.
That's good, man. That's really encouraging. All of that, stewardship, tithing. I just love that God is a father who loves his children the way that we do, and man, he better than we do. Yeah. And man, I want my kids to be blessed. Like, I want to set my kids up for success the older that they get. God's no different. Like, he wants to bless us too, and he has no reason to. But we serve a very amazing God who loves us and cares for us. And
I think in Psalms it says that God delights in our prosperity. Yeah. He's not a tightwad or a chinchy God. He's a gracious, giving, loving God, but he wants us to...
He's not going to put us in a bad position either.
He wants us to exhibit that we love him and are going to be faithful with what he trusts us with. Yeah. He trusts us with the minas. Yeah. And then he can trust us with the talents. Yeah.
This one just kind of off the cuff, but I thought about this. There's a seminar that Gateway had put on. This has been several years. It's on CD-ROM, right? Or it's on CD. So, but it's a man by the name of Steve Doolin. I believe he's one of the elders at Gateway right now, and he talked a lot about it's about stewardship. He had owned a construction company, and one of the things that he brought out was, why are people who aren't Christians successful then? You know, like, if God calls for us to tithe, and where he got to was, he said they're doing things biblically. They just don't have a relationship with God. They're doing biblical principles, and God's faithful to bless. Like, when you do things his way, the way that he calls, they're givers by nature. Like, they're not greedy for the most part. Like, this is what you see, and but I take that and I think, okay, if God will do that for people who aren't his children, then how much more is he going to bless his children whenever they're doing biblical principles and they're living for the Lord? Like, he's going to use you as a conduit. He's going to bless you to be a blessing to other people. And so that's good. I'm very grateful that you took the time to jump on here.
It's my pleasure.
I'm glad that you did, and I think, and there's so much, we'll probably break this up into a couple different segments, and where people can really chew on this and take it in. So, Tab, appreciate it, and we'll have you back on in the very near future if you'll allow us to.
That's awesome.
Cool. Thanks.